Hi. Thank you so much for joining us today. It really is a pleasure to be in this beautiful space and beautiful building, and despite the steepness of the stairs, I'm glad everybody was able to find a seat, and again, thank you for joining us. We don't currently have a microphone. We could try to get one and have Dr. Gauderman mic'd up, because she's the one that you really need to hear, and I will just try to speak louder. Can you ask Sergio to see if we can get a microphone? So thank you again for joining us. We have a really exciting night for you all, and with a wonderful lecture. The Office of the Vice President for Research is really pleased and excited to host this event every year, and they just keep getting better and better every single year. I want to welcome our folks on Zoom. We have about 50 registrations on Zoom, so welcome and thank you for joining us. And my understanding is some of those are actually class lectures where professors are showing this lecture for their class, so welcome to you as well. I do want to start. Sorry, I am on one leg tonight because of an injury. I do want to start by reading UNM's land acknowledgement. And founded in 1889, the University of New Mexico sits on the traditional homelands of the Pueblo of Sandia, the original people of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache, since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our history. A couple housekeeping items before we do get started. There is an elevator on the other side of the building for folks that would prefer to take an elevator instead of steps up. There's an exit over here, and then you do have to walk to the other side of the building, but there's an elevator. And the nice thing about that is the elevator will put you right outside of where the reception will be. So no point, you won't have to cross the building twice. The second is restrooms are outside the auditorium as well if they are needed, so thank you. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce and bring up Dr. Tim Castillo, who is the UNM Community Engagement Initiatives Director. Dr. Castillo.
Can you hear me now? How's the audio? This is my home department, so I teach in this lecture hall. So I don't usually use a microphone, so this is kind of odd for me. So I'm gonna get outfitted here. Well, thank you. This is such an honor to be here today. It's great to see community engagement scholars. Last year, well, let me just back up a little bit. I've been doing community engaged scholarship through the lens of architecture for many, many years. And last year, I was given the opportunity through the Academic Affairs Office to lead a new entity, which is the Office of Community Engagement. So that being said, we've had a legacy of community engagement here in New Mexico. So it's wonderful to be able to start to coalesce this and really start to understand our impact, in our region, nationally and globally. And it's just amazing what people are doing. Again, this lecture award is a tremendous honor. We've been able to have this for many years. I want to thank the Vice President's Office for being able to acknowledge community engagement scholars, because I think many institutions across the U.S. have started to really acknowledge community engagement, and I think we've done a great job over the last several years to really understand what it means and how we impact communities throughout the region. Again, this is just a list of, since 2016, Dr. Wallerstein was our initial person that received this award. As you can see, there's a long legacy of different disciplines and tremendous work. And so if you haven't had a chance to go to the website and look at this, it's wonderful. And getting to know these people, I think, is really important. You can also find the work on a variety of different platforms. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing in community engagement and some of the initiatives that we're doing in the office currently. For many of you that might not know, we actually have a special designation. We have this elective classification for community engagement. We received this in 2020. And it's an arduous report that we have to put together. My predecessor was able to put this together, and we received this classification in 2020. We're one of 357 institutions across the U.S., and we're even a smaller R1 Hispanic serving institution entity throughout the U.S. And so we feel that this is such a valuable thing to have. And we're, as you can see, I think it's us, UTEP, and New Mexico State in our region that have this, this designation. And so every 6 years we have to reapply and get reclassification. So when I stepped into this role, I wanted to have a committee that comprised faculty from across the institution. So this is my advisory faculty. You might recognize some of these faces. These are well-known community scholars, and they've just been tremendous in sort of leading us into a new place, into community engagement. We're actually very fortunate to be able to be housed here in George Pearl Hall. Dean Gonzalez actually created a space for us here. We're actually located on the second floor. We have a brand new staff. We're actively engaged right now in trying to really disseminate the work that we're doing here at New Mexico, but also becoming a front door for community members. So if you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at our new website, it's about a year old. It's called engagement.unm.edu. So I would highly recommend that. And as I mentioned, we're collecting data. We're collecting data for this report that we'll be submitting next year in April. And so if you're a community scholar and you want to have your data archived into this report, we have a survey. So you please go to the website and find that information. We're actively looking to get this information because it's really important for us to be able to demonstrate our impact. The way we're thinking about doing this is through a GIS map. We've been working with EDAC to develop this new impact map that demonstrates our regional impact, but also our national and global. And so we're rolling this out at the end of the month, so be looking out for that. It's really great to see the tremendous disciplines that are involved, everything from the medical school to here in architecture to history, you name it. We're doing tremendous work out there in our communities. That being said, we're holding our second annual Community Engagement Symposium this November. We're very fortunate to bring out the director from the Carnegie Foundation, Cammie Jones, and she's going to be our keynote. And what we thought we'd do is really focus on Hispanic serving institutions and really to learn from our partners in the region. So we've asked Texas Tech, UTEP, New Mexico State, University of Arizona, and University of Colorado to come and join us and to talk about the communities that we impact, what our shared knowledge, what are best practices, how can we do this work better. So we're very excited to have Cammie come out. It'll be an all-day event at the Student Union Building, so please come out and join us. It's a very limited capacity. We only have 120 seats, so if you're at all interested, please sign up. We'd love to have you come and join us. Again, I'm Tim Castillo, professor of architecture. If you ever want to get in contact with us, you can reach out to my email. Carol is my program coordinator, and we're always looking to talk to people that are doing this type of work. We're also, like I said, trying to be a front door for collaborators in our community. So if you have a problem or you have an idea and you want to talk to us and you want to work with some of our faculty, please come see us. We're really good at developing networks and trying to pair up people with the proper scholars to be able to do that impact work. Well, it gives me great pleasure. I'm going to kind of shift gears here, moving into the lecture. I'm very proud to introduce Dr. Gabriela Torres. She's currently the vice provost at Rhode Island College. She's a transformative leader committed to fostering a more diverse and social just academy. As a scholar, she has published more than 30 peer-reviewed articles, research reports, book chapters, in addition to volumes on marital rape and sexual violence and intimacy. Dr. Torres has been sought as an expert witness since 2011 in both US and Canadian courts. She is an expert on gender-based gang and anti-Indigenous violence in Guatemala. Her expertise spans both the US and Canada, and she has been a very long friend, colleague of Dr. Gauderman. So with that, will you please help me honor Dr. Torres?
just outfit myself with the mic to make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me all right?
No.
No?
Put it closer up to you.
Put it closer up to myself. All right, how about that? Is that a little bit better? All right. All right, I will try to speak loudly so that you can hear me, even if the mic is not as loud as we need it to. I'm not sure if we can adjust that volume. No, I probably cannot. All right. Thank you for having me here today. It is my distinct honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Kimberly Gauderman, today for this Community Engaged lecture. In introducing her, I want to share a little bit about the investment that Dr. Gauderman makes doing expert witnessing. What you may not know is that the work is as heavy as it is. It weighs. In many ways, it's a lot more demanding than other forms of research. It is, of course, as rigorous as other forms of research, but unlike other research, expert witnessing consumes the full self of the expert if they are going to do the work well. I am sure that she will not share this in her own remarks today because she carries that weight with great humility. Today, it is absolutely crucial that I tell you just a little bit about the nature of that work, if only so that you can understand the exceptional commitment that she has made to UNM's leadership as an HSI. I know a bit about how much of oneself is required having practiced as an expert witness. Asylum expert witnesses demands a kind of bravery for which most of us in the academy were never trained. It launches scholars into the midst of what has become one of the most heated national debates in America, whether you're ready or not. Providing expertise on country conditions demands that we translate academic knowledge to courts in support of the rights of immigrants to seek asylum amidst a national rhetoric that frames them as criminals and, as of late, as cat eaters. I know for her and for myself, it is painful to work with mothers and fathers and scared youth who spend months in detention or wait almost a decade for a hearing after surviving highly traumatic events. As expert witnesses, we see this in nearly every case, and we carry the load of knowing the pain of individuals that our society is actively othering. We help in this work, yet we're not always successful. That too has a weight once we have walked a few steps with an asylum seeker. I was surprised when I started how much asylum expert witnessing required a readiness to mount an aggressive defense of the research enterprise itself. It requires making the case time and time again that scholarship matters and must be considered in law, must be considered in decision making. We're kind of trained for this in the academy, but seldom to the degree of questioning that we are subject to by attorneys and judges. When we engage in peer review or apply for a job, we are familiar with the defense of expertise, but the scholar version pales in comparison. In expert witnessing, the vetting is constant. It happens in every case, and Dr. Gauderman has done hundreds. Each time we file an affidavit, our expertise is scrutinized, and it's not only our written work for the case. It is scrutinized in terms of any publication that you have ever done for inconsistencies, and not by peers who have any knowledge of our discipline or subject. Our CVs are poured over, our social media, if we happen to have it, is surveilled, Any error in phrasing oral testimony has the potential to diminish our own credibility and reputation that we're kind of used to as academics. Damage to a case is also an outcome of making an oral error, and it can fundamentally alter the life of the person whose claim you are providing expertise on. It is high stakes and requires nerves of steel every time. And if that were not enough, Asylum expert witnessing commands us to dive deeply into the suffering of others, their rapes, the unimaginable myriad of possible human harms that are enacted by strangers or families, the neglect of the state, the desperation, the loss, the constant loss, and we must, as scholars, dive deeply into the details. We must dive into what is said, how many assaults, what were they with, who was there, what happened afterwards, what were the injuries, what was the result, the journey north, and all the horrors that happened along the way. This work is, to put it simply, traumatic. I know that I can never read or work on affidavits at night. Otherwise, they're in my dreams, in my thoughts, they overwhelm. When I prepare a case, I have to steel myself to open some files because of what they contain. This we were definitely not trained to do as historians or myself as an anthropologist. But we do because it matters. It matters to our society, to individuals, and it makes good on the promise of the educational enterprise that we all participate in. Today, I'm honored to celebrate with you the bravery, the conviction, and the compassion, care, and humility with which Dr. Gauderman carries the weight of engaged scholarship. Her work changes lives and changes our country. Thank you, Dr. Gauderman, for inviting me here today to celebrate your exemplary scholarship. I couldn't be more honored.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Torres, Gabby, for that introduction. I'm very, very honored to be here with all of you. Thank you all for those who are here in person. Thank you to all of you who are there in Zoom world. I do want to thank some people and institutions. So I'd like to thank Drs. Liz Hutchison and Les Field, who nominated me for this award, and to all my colleagues and community partners who supported my nomination. I also want to thank the members of the Faculty Senate Research Policy Committee for their consideration of my nomination. I'd also like to thank the Office of the Vice President of Research, especially Marisa Lucero and Sam Mascarenas, who worked with me to organize this event. I also thank the support I've received from my colleagues, from my department, the History Department. I thank the Latin American Iberian Institute. And I also thank the support that I've received from the American Council of Learned Societies, which has supported my research on expert witnessing, which in turn has supported my work on my book, Practicing Asylum, which we will talk about later. So today I'm going to talk about who asylum seekers are. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the asylum system works, as well as talking with you about the practice of asylum. What do expert witnesses do? All right. So in your program, there is a line from the first stanza of Warsaw Shire's poem, Home. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. I'd like to share with you the last stanza of that poem. No one leaves home until home is a sweaty voice in your ear, saying, leave, run away from me now. I don't know what I've become, but I know that anywhere is safer than here. Leaving home is not trivial. Asylum seekers leave behind their families, sometimes their children, their communities, their culture, and their language. They leave because of fear. This is a defining characteristic of asylum seekers. They do not flee their homes to find a better life through greater economic opportunities. They are not trying to reunite with family members. They're also not coming from mental institutions. They are not former prison inmates. And they are not coming here to eat our pets. Asylum seekers flee to the U.S. to preserve their lives. As an expert witness on country conditions in Latin America, I use my training as an historian to hunt the shark, to study why and how perpetrators target their victims. I research why asylum seekers' home countries are dangerous to them, how social and legal norms define and stigmatize individuals as members of social sectors that are subordinate, as lesser citizens who do not warrant protection from their governments. Through my affidavits and testimony in immigration courts, I connect humanistic scholarship to an ongoing humanitarian immigration crisis, one that is generated by conditions of unbearable violence in Latin America and intolerance in the United States. I have worked on over 300 asylum cases since 2010. I work on the countries of Peru, Ecuador, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. I focus on gender-based and sexuality-based violence, the status of indigenous and Afro-descendants, gang violence, and police corruption and torture. Today I'm going to draw on my research and my experience as an expert witness to offer some reflections on the causes of migration, the complexity of the asylum system, and the role of scholarly expertise in asylum cases. So who are asylum seekers? Asylum seekers differ from other migrants because of their reasons for leaving their home countries and the legal processes that they undergo. Asylum seekers leave their country to seek protection from persecution and human rights violations, while other immigrants generally leave to pursue better living conditions and opportunities. The media and politicians don't generally differentiate asylum seekers from other types of immigrants. But it is important to do so because according to international and US law, asylum seekers have a distinct legal status. Asylum seekers undergo a lengthy and a complex judicial process in which they must demonstrate that they meet very restrictive criteria. According to the Migration Policy Institute, the majority of immigrants, 75% of those who migrate to the United States, cite better economic opportunities as a major reason. Additional reasons cited by migrants include family reunification, fleeing natural disasters, political instability, strife, and generalized violence. In a 2021 survey of Central Americans, only 5% cited fear of personal violence as a reason that they intended to migrate. Despite the fact that asylum seekers are a relatively small component of the migrant encounters at the US-Mexico border, the media and politicians regularly cite asylum seekers as the cause for what they refer to as an immigration crisis at the border. And policies to restrict immigration under the Obama, the Trump, and the Biden administrations have targeted asylum seekers despite their protected status under US law. Title 8 of the US Code states that any migrant on US territory or who arrives in the US, whether in a designated port of arrival, regardless of their status, may apply for asylum. In my work, I focus primarily on gender and sexuality-based violence and work mostly on cases that involve women, children, families, and LGBTQ+ persons. Of course, these categories overlap in lived experience, but they are considered to be distinct social sectors in the asylum process. Women, for example, may be recognized as a distinct social sector that is targeted with violence on account of their gender. In domestic violence cases, because in their countries of origin, women may be culturally defined as subordinate to their male partners. Men may treat women as property with which they can do as they like. In my cases that I've worked on, women have been beaten with whips, electric cords, machetes, cooking pots, hot irons, anything that the man could grab. They've been beaten with bare fists. They've been thrown on the ground and kicked repeatedly. They've been regularly raped, and they've been threatened with death. This violence often occurs in the presence of their children. When police are called despite laws that prohibit domestic violence, they seldom intervene because they view this violence as private, as a domestic matter. Death threats by male partners in the countries I research are serious. Honduras, for example, has the highest rate of femicide, the murder of a woman or a girl because of her gender, in the world. The impunity rate for femicide in the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, and Peru and Ecuador, ranges from 95 to 98%. That is, in these countries, you can kill a woman, and you can be almost assured that you will not receive any punishment. LGBTQ+ people may be targeted in their home countries because they are perceived as non-compliant with gender and sexual norms. In addition to being targeted by family members and the general public, LGBTQ+ people are regularly targeted by government officials and by gang members who often collaborate with the police. In Honduras, 60% of hate crimes against LGBTQ+ people are committed by police officers. Honduran security officials are considered the most corrupt forces in Latin America. A recent report by Human Rights in Honduras, in a recent human rights report by the US State Department, indicates that LGBTQ+ people are subjected to discrimination and violence, and that there's a 92% impunity for crimes committed against this sector. Honduras is considered one of the 7 most dangerous countries in the world for LGBTQ+ people. Let's see. Gangs are significant perpetrators of violence in the Northern Triangle and in Peru and Ecuador. In the Northern Triangle, the main gangs are the 18th Street, also known as M18, as well as MS-13. Both these gangs began as local gangs in the United States. They were street gangs in Los Angeles. And in 1996, President Clinton signed our last immigration reform. That act of 1996 allowed the federal government to strip residents, foreign-born residents, of their citizenship and to deport them to their countries of origin. Tens of thousands of people were repatriated to Central America and between 2000 and 2004. And among them were members of MS-13 and M18. These gangs brought gang culture to Central America, where violence and extortion is now commonplace. Although gangs target everyone for violence, they especially target vulnerable sectors, such as women and LGBTQ+ persons, as well as children. Thousands of children who resist gang recruitment are subject to assault, death threats, and even murder. So these are the types of violence that asylum seekers have experienced and fear to continue experience in their countries of origin. So what happens when they get to our border? What is the asylum system like that they must navigate? That looks really big, huh? There's not going to be a pop quiz before you enter the reception. I am showing you this so that you can see the complexity of the system. And you can see all the different ways and risks of deportation as individuals wind their way through this system.
Can you have the front lights turned down so we can read the print?
Oh. Is that better?
Yes. Can you read?
Are we okay? I'm okay.
Are you okay?
I am.
Okay.
I'm okay. Yeah. All right. So what this chart shows, and I'm not going to work you through the entire chart, but it shows Anna here arriving at the border. And what you can see is that Anna, one of the first things that Anna will undergo is that she will undergo an interview, right, by an asylum officer who will determine whether or not she is deported or whether or not she is allowed to continue through this system. Now, there are a number of hurdles that Anna is going to face. Right. Asylum seekers who cross outside of ports of entry usually present themselves to Border Patrol because they want to make a claim of asylum. And in the custody of Border Patrol, they will be interviewed by an official asylum officer. During this interview, the individual is asked the reasons that they are fleeing their country, and if their fears are found credible, that is, that they can show that there's a significant possibility that they will be persecuted or tortured if returned to their countries of origin, they are allowed to continue in the asylum system. But as you can see for Anna, who's pointed there with that large blue arrow, there are a number of hurdles that she is going to go through. after she passes that credible fear interview, that interview with the asylum officer, if it's positive, she then may be shunted to an asylum merits interview, which is another point of vetting of the asylum seeker, who at that point may be granted asylum, likely not, and then will be moved up to this top line here. Let's see. Yeah. Right. To preparing for the immigration hearing. Now, this is where expert witnesses generally enter the process, is after an individual has already been vetted and gone through a lengthy process. Sometimes it takes years to get to the level of an asylum hearing. Now, it looks straightforward, right? The first, what begins in the asylum hearing level, that process, is a notice to appear. But even that is a problem, right, for asylum seekers, because according to Track Immigration, in March 2024, they issued a report. Over 200,000 immigration court cases were dismissed because the Department of Homeland Security failed to file the notice to appear before the date of the hearing. So without a proper filing, the court lacks jurisdiction to hear the case, and asylum seekers lack a way to move their case forward. Now, if the applicant doesn't appear at a hearing because they did not receive the information, that applicant is put into deportation proceedings. Applicants also receive notices to appear that lack information, that don't tell them where or when their immigration hearing is. So even once an individual makes it all the way to the top of this chart and seems to be heading towards an immigration hearing, that first step is perilous. It's another point where they face deportation. Now, once they have the notice to appear, let's imagine they're one of those immigration, let's imagine Anna. Anna gets her NTA, her notice to appear, and she goes next to a master calendar hearing. The master calendar hearing is when her immigration hearing, the one that will determine whether her status in the United States, when that will be scheduled. Now, because of the backlog of pending cases in immigration courts, which stands at around 3.5 million right now, the merits hearing will likely be scheduled years in the future. Now, at the merits hearing, okay, this is the hearing where the applicant will present their case for asylum to the immigration judge. While waiting for their immigration hearing, applicants are not allowed to request a work permit until they have been here at least 6 months. And because there's also a backlog in work permits, this can also take much longer. These hearings are defensive in that when an individual goes into an immigration court, the presumption is that they will be deported unless they can show reason for which they should not. Now, the criteria that they must meet in immigration court, let's see, are the 5 grounds, the 5 protected grounds of asylum. A person must demonstrate that they have been harmed or fear harm on the basis of their race, their religion, their political views, their nationality, or membership in a particular social group, also known as PSG. Now, the PSG is the newest, and it is the most difficult to support ground of asylum, and it's the ground that I usually work with. Asylum is an individual grant, but it's based on the perception of the perpetrator. It's based on the perception that the individual is not seen as an individual, but is instead seen as a member of a group, that they have a corporate identity. And this identity, this group identity, right, must be based on one of these grounds. So the presumption then is that you are not targeted because of your personal characteristics, but that in fact the person sees you as a member of a sector, such as an LGBTQ plus sector, and on the basis of perceiving you as a member of that group, they target you with violence. Now, in this process, it's important again to recognize that it's the perception of the perpetrator. The identity, the group identity that's imposed on the individual may not match with their own identity, their own forms of self-expression. So for example, I've worked on cases for heterosexual cisgender men who are perceived as being gay in their countries and then persecuted, targeted on the basis of their membership in that perceived group. So in immigration, it's not how you identify. You have to show how others have perceived you, and you have to make that connection, right, between the violence you experience and the group identity that is perceived, right, for you. Now, fleeing general violence, common violence, right, or common or private crime, natural disasters are not the basis of asylum. You may fear violence in your country, but unless you can connect it to the perception that you are a member of one of these groups, right, then you do not have an asylum claim. So women, for example, who are fleeing domestic violence, often face great obstacles in the asylum system because immigration judges regularly interpret domestic violence as a private crime and therefore not eligible for asylum relief. Their interpretation is that the domestic partner is just a creep, and they deny women asylum. Now, as an example, in a recent case I worked on, this was a domestic violence case that included attempted forced abortion, a hired assassin, a lack of response by the police and the judiciary. The judge, who has no immigration background, that's another element. Immigration judges do not have to have any background in immigration law. The judge, in this case, ruled that this was an interpersonal conflict and denied asylum to the woman. This case is under appeal. Now, individuals must also show that the violence they've experienced, they've been subjected to, rises to the level of persecution, and that the government is unable or unwilling to protect them from this violence. And they also have to show that they are unable to relocate within their country to avoid asylum. It sounded like a cat in peril out here in the store. And so now I'm going to move on and talk about how expert witnesses enter the system, what we do, right, in order to clarify the status of individuals and the kinds of violence that they've experienced in their countries. So I learned about the specific details of a case, primarily through the applicant's declaration. That is a chronological narrative of the applicant, by the applicant, of their life experiences What is that noise? What do I need to do to make it stop? Turn this off? Do we not need it?
Try that.
Is that better? Or we'll see if the noise comes back. All right. So, expert witnessing. We start with the declaration of the applicant, and which is a chronological narrative of everything that the applicant has experienced, including each violent act that they have been subjected to and their fear of future violence if they were to return. I use my expertise as an historian to research country conditions that pertain to a case and that may provide context for the applicant's experiences and their choices in their responses to violent acts. In a domestic violence case, for example, I examine whether women are a specific and visible sector of society. This may include looking to see if there are laws about women that reflect that the government considers them a separate sector of society. I also investigate gender norms and current practices of violence against women and government action or inaction to protect women from violence. I also research the likelihood that relocation within the country would provide safety and be reasonable for the applicant. I analyze specific issues in the case. If a woman did not report violence to the police, for example, I research to see whether there are reasons that women don't report. Do women regularly not report violence to the police? Is reporting to the police effective? In a recent case that included a mother and 2 children, one of whom had Down syndrome, my research included a focus on the status and government protection of children with intellectual disabilities, and whether the child's status would likely increase the mother and child's vulnerability to gang violence. It does. So, to do this research, I triangulate multiple sources, including U.S. and foreign government reports and legislation, reports by UN agencies and other international organizations, and media reports. My research is continual, as I need to remain current in what's happening in each of the countries that I work on. I maintain myself current by receiving daily alerts on each country I work on. I also receive weekly updates from various research organizations. I'm continually looking at the countries I work on to understand what is happening in politics, in the legislature. Are there examples of violence against the sectors that I work on? Each paragraph of my affidavit is numbered and includes links to all the evidence that I use in my reports, and that supports the argument of each that I'm making in each paragraph. And my affidavits run between 20 and 40 plus pages. And it's really, I think, important to emphasize that this research that I do is not to advocate for individual asylum seekers. My research must be objective, and it cannot be seen as advocacy. So instead, my role as an expert witness is to provide research that will assist the immigration judge in making an informed decision on the status of the individual. Now, the affidavit is also connected to my testimony in immigration hearings. In addition to writing affidavits, I'm frequently called to testify in these hearings. And in these hearings, government attorneys, ICE attorneys, are there to represent the government's position that the individual should be deported. These government attorneys regularly attack the qualifications of an expert. Right? They do this because if an expert is disqualified, then all that research that's in that affidavit is not entered into evidence for that individual. So I am qualified as an expert by an immigration judge in each case that I work on. Being an expert is not a status I hold, it's one I have to earn in every hearing that I'm a part of. Judges cite my research in their affidavits and they cite my research in their decisions. Decisions can be made orally or in written form. The hearing itself is another kind of teaching venue then. Through our affidavits and through our testimony, we educate the judge about conditions in a country that are pertinent and relevant for the judge to make a decision about that individual status. What we do as expert witnesses in one case can, in fact, because it is education, it can then is absorbed, right? What we hope, right, is that an immigration judge will learn from our testimony and be able to apply it to other cases. So, as an example of this, I was an expert witness in Chicago in a case for a transgender woman in the Northern Triangle. And in that case, I testified in front of the judge, and the judge granted asylum. I was an expert witness in another case for a transgender woman, and it also happened to be in front of that judge. And when we got to the point of the hearing where I would come in as the expert to testify, the judge told the attorney that he would really enjoy having me in his courtroom again, but he felt it would be most efficient if he just granted asylum. So this work connects what we do as scholars in terms of our research and our writing, but it also draws upon our ability to teach, to be able to educate the attorneys who are working on behalf of the applicants, to educate the immigration judges, so that our research then, right, can be applied directly to determining what is going to happen next in an individual's life. Now, in these hearings, I will say one of our barriers is that there are continual postponements that lengthen the process for asylum seekers. So this is a problem because for individual asylum seekers, we may be completely ready for an immigration case. The individual is ready the applicant is ready, the brief has been filed, my affidavit has been filed with the court, and then the hearing is postponed. Hearings can be postponed, right, for 5, 6, even 10 years. So in that process then, when that hearing is rescheduled, witnesses may have died, immigration law may have changed, and we have to restart the case. So this summer, for example, I finalized my 4th affidavit for a case that was originally scheduled in 2018. And this is happening more and more regularly in the asylum system. Now, asylum outcomes. According to the Vera Institute, 95% of successful asylum cases are those by applicants with representation. And this makes sense because the asylum system is in fact really complicated. Now, for a woman fleeing domestic violence, for example, in the asylum system, she must articulate her experiences as a product of systemic social forces that have defined her as a member of a subordinate sector that legitimates abuse and assault by her intimate partner. She must explain and document why her government will not protect her. She must explain why even if she relocated in her country, she would not be safe from violence. Because of the extreme levels of violence that many asylum seekers have experienced, this woman is also likely traumatized and suffering from PTSD. She may also lack education and be illiterate. She will explain her situation through a translator and will also be arguing against a trained government attorney. This is a heavy lift for an asylum seeker. It is a heavy lift to represent themselves in immigration court. And yet there is no mandatory representation for asylum seekers, even children. President Obama brought in Judge Weil as an expert witness to explain why children should not receive mandatory representation in their asylum claims. According to Judge Weil, I have trained 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in immigration law. You can do a fair hearing, unquote. So this expert witness, Judge Weil, his role was Assistant Chief Immigration Judge, and he was responsible for overseeing the policies in the country's 58 immigration courts. Now, serendipity plays a critical role in case outcomes. Immigration judges have a great deal of autonomy. There are judges with 98 to 100% denial rates. A judge in Houston, for example, denied 100% of the cases in front of him in 2023. Nationally, applicants from the Northern Triangle are among those with the smallest success rate. According to the Executive Office for Immigration Review, in fiscal year 2023, immigration judges granted asylum in 7% of Honduran cases. As a comparison, immigration judges granted asylum to 55% of Chinese applicants. Why this discrepancy in asylum, in the asylum cases by nationality? Some of this is due to politics. Obama, Trump, and Biden have issued executive orders and policies and rules that specifically target asylum seekers from the Northern Triangle at the US-Mexico border. Obama's detention and expedited removal of children, mothers and children from the Northern Triangle, right, included expanding family detention centers, first here in New Mexico and Artesia. Trump has made many derogatory remarks about Central Americans, and his attorneys generals issued decisions that restricted domestic violence and gang violence as grounds for asylum, the most common grounds of asylum sought by people fleeing Central America. Biden continues to restrict asylum seekers at the border, and earlier in his term directed the expedited removal, the deportation of families with children, a population that is predominantly from the Northern Triangle. So, in conclusion, many citizens of foreign countries are fleeing forms of violence which should qualify them for asylum in the US. The asylum system is both arbitrary and weighted against applicants from particular countries. There is much evidence, including from our own government, that women, LGBTQ+ people, children, and racial minorities in many Latin American countries are targeted for violence on account of their perceived status in their countries and are not protected by their governments from violent acts, including murder. Because of the growing restrictions on asylum, the work of expert witnesses is increasingly critical, but there are insufficient numbers of experts to serve in these cases. And for that reason, I collaborated with legal scholars, with other academics, with other expert witnesses to create the book Practicing Asylum, a book whose goal is to encourage, right, as well as to guide academics who want to be involved in this kind of research for asylum seekers. Now, Practicing Asylum provides a historical framework, it provides conceptual tools, it provides templates adaptable to an ever-changing asylum system. Published in paperback by the University of California, it is also available free of charge in an open access format. These are some resources that folks might be interested in. In addition to the book, Practicing Asylum, the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies provides resources for attorneys, but also provides resources and trainings for expert witnesses. The New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, right here in Oregon, where am I? In New Mexico, also, and located, right, connected here to the University of New Mexico, provides resources and also provides a lot of opportunities for individuals to volunteer if folks are interested in supporting asylum seekers, visiting asylum seekers in detention centers. The New Mexico Immigrant Law Center has a number of opportunities. The American Immigration Council is a really great nonpartisan resource that can give you a lot of information about policies and changes in immigration law. And Track Immigration. This is a research organization located at Syracuse University, and this they provide information. They track immigration policy. They will tell you how many people are being detained, how many of the notice to appears, right, aren't actually making it to individual applicants. So this is a research organization that can give you really current and accurate information about the immigration and asylum process. So I would like to end with saying that as an expert witness, I am strengthened by the bravery and the resilience of individuals who, despite the terrors and the abuse that they have survived in their home countries, believe that our country will honor its pledge to provide refuge for the persecuted. My heart is crowded with their stories. Each hearing with a successful outcome is a reminder that justice is possible and sometimes manifests one person at a time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gauderman. That was a great presentation and great information. I appreciate it. We are doing pretty close on schedule, but I do want to give the opportunity to give for Dr. Gauderman to answer some questions. If folks in the audience have questions, please use your voice and shout as loud as you can.
Turn on the lights.
Yes, for folks in our on our watching via Zoom, there is a Q&A function on the Zoom where you may submit your questions, and we can also try to answer those. So I will open it at this time for any questions you may have for Dr. Gauderman.
Yes.
Is your book available in Spanish yet?
No, not yet.
Dr. Gauderman,
Yes.
why don't people, is there a change in the quality or preparation of immigration judges over presidential administrations?
Yes.
Have you noticed, and what would those be?
Yeah. I've been doing this work through 3 different presidential administrations. So I have seen changes in asylum law, but I've also seen changes in the kinds of immigration judges that are appointed. So, for example, in the Trump administration, many of those immigration judges who were appointed were state prosecutors with no immigration background whatsoever. And so in that, when you have immigration judges with very little background in immigration law, it means that immigration hearings, right, there may be many violations in those hearings. So during that time, I was in a hearing in New York. The cases I work on are all over the country. And this was a case in New York City, and that immigration judge, it was one of her very first cases, and she was a state prosecutor. And there were a lot of irregularities during the day, but in the end, she wanted to continue the case without a translator. And because the immigration attorney I was working with also was not experienced, that immigration attorney thought that that would be okay, as long as everybody agreed that it was okay. And as an expert witness, I said, no, that is illegal, and you must have a translator, and I will not be part of this hearing unless you have a translator. So that would have been a significant problem if that hearing had continued without a translator, as the immigration judge had suggested. So these are the kinds of issues that we face if immigration judges are not properly trained. Yes?
But why do people come all the way through Mexico when, couldn't they get asylum in a closer country? Why do they come here?
Well, for the sectors that I work on, the dangers that they face in Mexico, right, are similar to the dangers they face in their countries of origin. So if you are an LGBTQ plus person, right, if you are a transgender woman from Honduras, right, and you go through El Salvador and Honduras and up through Mexico, each of those countries also persecute transgender women. So those countries would not be, right, a safe third country for many sectors, right, in society. Yeah.
I imagine that, that your services are in high demand all across the country. So how do you go about selecting the cases that you do work on and the cases that you unfortunately have to turn down? Because I imagine that there's a large dearth of expert witnesses across the country.
Yeah, there are just insufficient numbers, as you know, Rebecca, of expert witnesses. We can't serve on every case. And so I regularly have to turn cases down, often because of my schedule is so tight with cases I'm already working on, but also I'm a full-time professor, right, at UNM. I have other things that I do. I make determinations on my schedule, but I also make determinations based on my scope of expertise. It's really important for an expert to know the limits of their expertise. Because if you are drawn out of your expertise, then that can disqualify any information that you have in your affidavit or any testimony that you have given in court. And government attorneys will actively try to draw you outside of your expertise to see if they can trap you into making a statement about a topic that really you're not qualified to make a statement about. You haven't done the research. So that would be another reason that I would not take on a case, is that I know it's outside the scope of my expertise. And then sometimes a third reason is because after reading the declaration or getting a narrative of the individual's experience, if they don't reflect my understanding of country conditions, that would also be a reason that I would refuse to take a case.
We do have a question from online.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little to the secondary trauma that expert witnesses commonly experience? What impact does this work have on your mental well-being?
This is an arduous form of work, for sure. And this is why in our book, in the book Practicing Asylum, the last chapter by Maria Baldini is all about how you recognize secondary trauma and how you take care of yourself. Because we can't bring people into this form of service unless we also give them resources to take care of themselves. So yes, this is really a form of work that in which we are exposed to incredible forms of violence in individuals' declarations. I'm still shocked by the perversity of humanity, even though I have worked on hundreds of cases. As Dr. Torres indicated, right, when you open up a declaration for the first time, you have to be in a space that you can read it, right, that you can cry, and that you can then draw yourself together so that you can do the research, right, so that you can contextualize that individual's experience in front of an immigration judge. So it's important to take care of ourselves. But as scholars, right, we need to do that anyway. This is not the only form of trauma that scholars are exposed to. We're exposed to trauma in the topics that we teach, right, in the other kinds of research that we do. It's important that we take care of ourselves. It's important to have a community to support you through this work. And it's important to take a break. And so at times I have taken a break from Asylum. I've realized I can't absorb another story. I need to take a break because I'm not going to be productive and I'm going to destroy my mental health. So I appreciate that question a great deal, and it is widely recognized that this work is traumatizing, but there really are ways to take care of yourself in the process of doing this work.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Kim, I'm going to ask you to look in your crystal ball, and I know so much changes depending on who's in the White House. So if Kamala Harris wins the presidency in November, you all better get out and vote. You know, with her history as a prosecutor, I know there are, well, I'll just leave it at that. Do you have any hope that something advantageous around this topic could happen? Again, I won't hold you to it, but...
Well, thank you for that. I am a hopeful person, but I will just say, historically, right, restricting asylum, restricting immigration in general is nonpartisan. Whether the administration is Republican or Democrat, right? We have seen restrictive asylum practices as well as asylum law. Right now, our asylum laws have not been changed since 1996. And the 1996 law, which I mentioned in terms of moving gang violence to Central America, that was signed by Clinton, and that's considered a very restrictive asylum law. So I want to let you know that what can you do? It's because it is nonpartisan. Democrats and Republicans have restricted asylum status. You need to make your voices heard. You need to talk to your representatives. You need to let them know that this is an important issue for you. Because having Kamala Harris in the office of the presidency is not going to be sufficient. Right? She backed that last immigration law that the Republicans then also stopped from going forward. But if it had gone forward, if there had been bipartisan support, that would have been a very restrictive asylum law. So we cannot simply rest on our national elections and look at political parties as being the answer to due process in asylum cases.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and allow one more. We do have a wonderful reception that's waiting for us. But yes, we'll allow one more question, please.
Yes, I think I understood you to say that there are about 3.5 million cases on backlogs.
Correct.
What is what's the change in that on an annual basis?
Well, last year it was about 2 million in 2020, fiscal year 2023. So it is increasing exponentially. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But you can see one of the reasons that there is this backlog is because the system itself is so inefficient, right? And having, there aren't enough immigration judges. And if the immigration judges aren't well trained, then those cases linger, right? They're not correctly judged, right, on procedural bases, and then they have to be appealed. So this inefficiency in the system is a significant factor, right, in this growing backlog of cases, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Dr. Gauderman. I would like to introduce Assistant Vice President for Research, Melissa Emery Thompson, to present the citation to Dr. Gauderman. And then please afterwards join us at the reception. It's on the first floor of this building, but on the other side of the building in the gallery. Dr. Thompson?
I'm not going to keep you much longer, but I get to do the really good part, which is to confer the actual award. This award is one of the highest honors that UNM confers on faculty for their career achievement. It is obviously a particular kind of award for a kind of work that is very challenging and which brings great rewards. It demonstrates UNM's commitment as a public institution that our work should have positive and meaningful impacts on our communities, whether they're local communities, global communities. Dr. Gauderman is our 9th recipient of the Community Engaged Research Lecture Award. As we saw, the recipients have represented all sorts of different fields, and they've shown different ways of translating the community engaged approach into scholarship. One thing they have in common is that these have always been really humbling talks to hear. The magnitude of the impact that our faculty are having on the world, it requires patience and dedication, and as we saw, a lot of strength. I think a particular kind of mindset that puts you beyond how your scholarship affects your career trajectory or your discipline. I think you saw from this outstanding lecture why Dr. Gauderman has been selected for the award, but I did want to give some perspective that our selection committee considers a lot of different factors when they make these awards, and it does include the productivity and the impact of the scholarship. It considers various ways that communities are engaged, not just through the outcomes of the work, but in designing and carrying out the research. The committee weighs pretty heavily how the nominee has used their work to create transformative educational opportunities for UNM students. So there's it's a lot under consideration. Another thing that makes the award particularly special is that the selection is made by a committee of Dr. Gauderman's peers, UNM faculty, on the Research Policy Committee. So I want to again thank the Research Policy Committee for their hard work in selecting the award winners. And finally, I really want to thank the generosity of Dr. Gauderman's colleagues, Dr. Liz Hutchison, Dr. Les Field, who prepared an outstanding letter of nomination. We rely on you in order to identify the strengths of the faculty that are good candidates for our award. So with that, I'm happy to present to you, let's move out a little here. With the Community Engaged Research Lecture. If you could join me in not only congratulating but thanking Dr. Gauderman for her outstanding work.
Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody.
Enjoy the reception.